He always looked so perfect in front of everyone. Mark would smile at me every morning, kiss me goodnight, and tell me how much he loved me. But behind that smile, I started noticing small things that didn't feel right. The way he would casually check his bank account, counting my money more carefully than he noticed my tears. The way he praised my hard work but never seemed to care about the long hours I put in. I was juggling 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make sure we had everything we needed. I cooked, cleaned, and handled all the bills. I never complained because I thought love meant sacrifice, and I believed he appreciated it. At least, I hoped he did. But little signs kept popping up. Mark would suggest expensive dinners or trips and then expect me to cover most of it. He never offered to help, never asked if I was tired, never noticed when I was drained. Even simple moments felt calculated. He would show excitement when we bought a new gadget or a fancy car, but he barely noticed when I stayed up late working, stressed and exhausted. I started to feel invisible. My feelings didn't seem to matter. It was as if my hard work was only important because it filled his bank account, not because it made our home or life better for both of us. I tried talking to him. I'd hint at how tired I was, how lonely I felt, but he brushed it off with a laugh or a shrug. "You're doing great, Liv. Don't worry about it," he'd say. But his eyes told the truth. He was more interested in how much money I brought home than in me. I kept thinking I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Even at that early stage, a small voice inside me whispered that I had to be careful. That love alone wasn't enough if the person you trusted valued money more than your feelings. And though I didn't yet know the full extent of his greed, I could feel the cracks forming in what I thought was a perfect marriage. The silent sacrifices I made were already unnoticed, and I wondered how long I could keep giving before it broke me completely. Every day, I worked harder than anyone knew. I gave up opportunities for my own career, skipped nights out with friends, and even put my own hobbies aside, all so Mark could have the life he wanted. He dreamed big, new business ideas, fancy cars, weekend trips, expensive gadgets, and I quietly made them possible. I told myself it was love. I told myself sacrifice was part of marriage. I believed that if I gave enough, our life together would be perfect. I never complained. Even when I felt exhausted, my mind racing with bills and work stress, I smiled and acted like everything was fine. I didn't want to seem weak. I didn't want to cause fights. I thought my sacrifices would show him how much I cared. I believed that one day, he would notice and appreciate it. But Mark didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and it didn't matter to him. He would casually check our accounts, sometimes glancing at the money I'd worked so hard to earn, as if it was his by right. He never asked if I was tired. He never thanked me for staying late at work or covering his whims. Instead, he would dismiss my stress with a joke or a shrug, acting like my feelings were less important than the cash in our bank. Sometimes, I caught subtle hints of his entitlement. A look when I hesitated to buy something for him. A small sigh when I suggested he cut back on spending. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I just had to try harder, love harder. But deep down, I knew I was giving more than I should. My happiness was slipping away while his desires grew bigger. Every dollar I earned, every hour I worked, was quietly building the life he wanted, but it wasn't building love. It was building control. And I started to realize that the more I gave, the more he expected, and the less he cared about me. My silent sacrifices became invisible, unnoticed, and slowly, the weight of them pressed on my heart. I loved him, but I was beginning to understand that love alone couldn't fix everything, especially when the person you loved valued money more than the heart giving it. One afternoon, I noticed something unusual while going through our bank statements. A large sum of money had been withdrawn, more than I remembered authorizing for anything. When I asked Mark about it, he smiled, charming as always, and said it was for a friend's business venture, a promising opportunity he didn't want me to worry about. I nodded, trying to trust him, but a small voice in my head whispered that something was off. I asked a few questions, gently, about the investment. He brushed them aside with casual confidence, explaining how it could double or triple our money. "Trust me, Liv," he said. "This is a smart move." His voice was smooth, his hand reassuring on mine, and for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. But my gut told me differently. Over the next few days, I tried to shake the unease. I watched him closely, noticing the little things that didn't add up. Phone calls he didn't want me to overhear. Receipts that didn't match the story he told. He was always charming when I confronted him lightly, smiling, making jokes, and somehow turning my suspicion into worry for myself. "Why are you doubting me?" he would say. I felt guilty, thinking maybe I was overreacting. But deep inside, I couldn't ignore the warning signs. I began checking accounts more often, following small trails of money, and piecing together his secretive decisions. Every new discovery made my stomach twist. The realization that he had acted without my knowledge hit me hard. This wasn't just a mistake or a bad business call. It was a choice he made alone, using my money, my hard-earned savings, and my trust without asking. The tension between us grew, even though he smiled and acted like nothing had changed. I felt the betrayal, the weight of being sidelined in decisions that affected both of us. My heart hurt, but I kept calm on the outside, knowing I had to understand the full picture before reacting. The charm that once made me trust him now only made the betrayal sharper. I realized then that the man I loved was capable of putting his own interests above our marriage, and the first cracks of trust had already begun to form. After the first signs of betrayal, things between us started to change in ways I hadn't expected. Mark became distant. He stopped talking about his day, stopped sharing little things like he used to. When I tried to open up about my own feelings, he would shrug, avoid eye contact, or sometimes even make me feel silly for caring. Small worries I had, about money, our future, or even just how I felt, were labeled as overreactions. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself he was just stressed, that maybe I was reading too much into it. But the quiet nights grew longer. The smiles became forced. Dinner conversations dwindled to one-word answers. Even when I asked him how he was feeling, he'd brush it off, saying everything was fine, while I could feel a wall rising between us. My friends started noticing too. They would ask if I was okay, if I was getting enough rest, if everything at home was all right. I would smile, nod, and say I was fine. I didn't want anyone to judge our marriage, and I didn't want to admit that the man I loved was slowly shutting me out. Inside, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but I convinced myself it was my responsibility to hold everything together. I kept doing all the work, managing bills, keeping the house in order, supporting him in his career ambitions. I tried to keep the atmosphere light, to make him feel comfortable, to fix the tension even though it wasn't mine to fix alone. My silent tears piled up at night when he wasn't around, when I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of loneliness in my own home. I began to realize that his emotional distance wasn't temporary. He wasn't just stressed, he was deliberately avoiding connection. And as hard as I tried to maintain our marriage, I felt myself being pushed further away with every passing day. The love I poured into our relationship was becoming invisible, unacknowledged, and my heart was quietly breaking under the weight of it all. One evening, while going through some paperwork, I stumbled across something that made my heart stop. There were bills, credit card statements, and receipts, some for expensive dinners, luxury gifts, and hotel stays. At first, I couldn't understand them. Then, as I traced the payments, a sinking feeling hit me. These weren't business expenses or mistakes. The money I had worked so hard for, the money I had quietly sacrificed for, had been spent on someone else, Vanessa, a wealthy woman I barely knew. I sat there, frozen, staring at the receipts, trying to make sense of it. The realization hit me like a punch. Mark was having an affair, and it had been funded entirely by me. Every dollar I had given, every sacrifice I had made, had been used to satisfy his greed and pleasure. My chest tightened, and I felt a wave of nausea and disbelief wash over me. At first, I wanted to confront him immediately, to yell, to cry, to demand answers. but instead, I just sat quietly, letting the truth sink in. Every smile he had given me, every word of love he had whispered, now felt like a lie. He never loved me, not really. All the attention, all the charm, all the care he showed was a mask for what he truly valued, my money. Tears streamed down my face, silent but relentless. I felt humiliated, heartbroken, and foolish for trusting him. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the deception, the deliberate way he had taken advantage of me, the way he had turned my love and loyalty into a personal bank for someone else. In that moment, the depth of his greed and dishonesty became undeniable. I could no longer ignore it, excuse it, or convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. The man I had devoted myself to, who I had believed loved me, had chosen money and another woman over me. The truth was crushing, and for the first time I began to understand that my life with Mark could never be the same. The betrayal had reached its peak, and there was no turning back from the pain I had just uncovered. After the shocking discovery, I realized I couldn't let my emotions control me. I had spent so long sacrificing and giving, only to be betrayed, and I knew that screaming or crying in front of Mark wouldn't solve anything. I needed a plan, a careful, quiet way to take back control of my life. I started by organizing everything. Every receipt, every transaction, every suspicious withdrawal, I kept a record. I went through bank statements and bills methodically, writing down every detail. I wanted proof, not just feelings. I wanted clarity, so when the time came, I could act without hesitation. At the same time, I began thinking about my independence. For years, I had relied on our combined life, pouring myself into supporting him, and now I realized I needed to build something for myself. I made lists of ways to secure my finances, considered options for moving out, and planned how I could start small, steady steps toward freedom. I didn't need to rush. The calm approach was better than impulsive anger. Mark noticed some changes in me, but I stayed quiet. I didn't give him a reason to suspect I knew everything. I smiled when necessary, acted normal, and kept the household running, all while quietly building my strategy. I knew he thrived on control and charm, so my silence became my strength. Every night, I would sit down with my notes, making sure nothing was left out. I studied patterns, figured out where he spent money without telling me, and thought about how I could protect myself legally and financially. My heart still hurt, but I felt a growing sense of power. This was no longer about heartbreak alone, it was about reclaiming my life with precision. I reminded myself that revenge didn't need to be loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be a scene or a confrontation. Sometimes the quiet, careful steps, done with patience and intelligence, were far more effective. And in that calm, calculated space, I started to feel hope again, hope that I could survive this betrayal, come out stronger, and finally take control of my life without relying on someone who had never truly cared for me. The day finally came when I knew I had to face him. I took a deep breath and waited for the right moment. I didn't want anger or tears to give him the upper hand. I needed calm, clarity, and control. When I walked into the living room, I held the papers, the receipts, the bills, and the notes I had kept over the past weeks. Mark looked up, smiling at first, as if nothing had changed. But I stayed steady. I laid everything out on the table in front of him, one by one. I showed him the lavish dinners, the hotel stays, the expensive gifts, all paid for with my money, all going to Vanessa. I showed the investments he had made without telling me, the withdrawals I hadn't authorized. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply spoke clearly, letting the evidence do the talking. At first, Mark froze. Then he tried to charm his way out, offering explanations, promises, apologies. I listened quietly. Every excuse felt hollow. I could see the shock in his eyes, but also the expectation. He expected me to forgive him, to brush it aside, to keep the marriage together as if nothing had happened. I shook my head. Mark, I've given everything I had to this marriage. I trusted you with my heart, my time, my money. And you betrayed all of it. My voice was calm, but firm. I'm done trusting you. I filed for separation, and I'm taking full control of my finances. This ends here. He tried to argue, tried to plead, but I stayed composed. I didn't let him guilt me. I didn't let him distract me. I knew my power now lay in the fact that I was no longer dependent on him. I had the evidence, I had my independence, and I had my dignity intact. Mark's shock turned to frustration, but it didn't matter. I had already won in the quietest, most powerful way. I had confronted him not with rage, but with truth, and that truth could not be ignored. In that moment, I felt lighter, stronger, and certain that I was reclaiming my life. He had expected drama, but my calm resolve became the ultimate answer to his betrayal. After the confrontation, I knew I needed space to breathe and rebuild. I moved out temporarily, taking only what I truly needed. The apartment felt quiet at first, but instead of loneliness, I felt a growing sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to manage someone else's greed or charm, I could focus entirely on myself. I decided to start my own small business. I had ideas I'd put aside for years while supporting Mark's ambitions, and now I had the time and energy to pursue them. I worked long hours, but it was different this time. Every effort I put in was for me, not for someone else. Every success, every small milestone, reminded me of what I had given up and what I could reclaim. Mark called a few times, trying to check in, but I kept my distance. I didn't answer every call or message. I didn't argue or explain. I let him realize that I was no longer under his control. Each day I focused on building my life, learning new skills, and enjoying small victories. The confidence I gained wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was steady and undeniable. I began to notice a change in myself. I walked taller, spoke with more certainty, and smiled more freely. My days were mine, my choices mine, and my happiness no longer dependent on someone who had betrayed me. I realized that freedom itself was a form of revenge, a quiet, sharp statement that Mark no longer had any power over me. Even small things, like paying for my own meals, decorating my own space, or deciding how to spend my money, felt revolutionary. I was living the life I had once sacrificed, proving not to him, but to myself, that I could survive and thrive without depending on someone who valued money over love. By the end of those first few months, I felt stronger than I had in years. The power in the relationship had shifted entirely. I didn't need drama or confrontation to show Mark he had lost control. My independence, my confidence, and my quiet successes were enough. I was finally living for myself, and that alone was the most effective revenge I could imagine. After I moved out and started focusing on myself, life for Mark began to change in ways I hadn't planned, but that didn't surprise me. At first, he acted as if everything was normal, going through the motions, keeping up appearances. But soon, it became clear that my absence left a space he couldn't fill. The energy, support, and care I had quietly provided were gone, and suddenly, he felt it. Friends started noticing his frustration. Casual conversations revealed tension, he seemed distracted, irritable, and more restless than usual. He tried to maintain control, but the emptiness I left behind was unmistakable. I didn't interfere. I didn't reach out. I let him struggle with the consequences of his own choices, quietly observing from a distance. Meanwhile, my own life was taking shape in ways I hadn't imagined possible. My small business grew steadily, each achievement a reminder that I was building something real for myself. I made my own decisions, spent my time as I pleased, and reclaimed every ounce of independence that had been stolen from me. There was no need to boast or flaunt my success. My life itself became the statement. The revenge I sought wasn't about humiliation or confrontation. It wasn't about showing him off to friends or making him regret publicly. It was quieter, sharper, and far more effective. Peace replaced my anxiety, stability replaced my stress, and financial independence replaced my dependence on him. Every day I lived fully, free from his greed and manipulation. I felt the power shift complete. Mark noticed, in small ways, the life he had lost. Invitations he once took for granted now felt heavier without my presence. Opportunities to control or charm me vanished, and he could do nothing to reclaim what he had taken for granted. I didn't gloat, didn't make a show of it, and never sought revenge in words or actions. I simply existed as the person I had always wanted to be, stronger and self-sufficient. And in that quiet, steady way, my revenge was complete. I had survived betrayal, reclaimed my life, and proved that freedom, confidence, and peace are far more powerful than anger or confrontation ever could be. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. The heartbreak, the betrayal, and the silent sacrifices I made were some of the hardest things I've ever endured. At times, it felt unbearable, like my whole world had been turned upside down. But now, I understand that every painful moment shaped me into a stronger, wiser person. I learned to value myself, to trust my instincts, and to never let anyone take advantage of my love or my efforts again. Mark is left with regrets that I never needed to push onto him. He sees the consequences of his actions in the empty space I left behind, in the life I built without him, and in the peace I now carry. I don't need him to apologize, and I don't need him to understand. The lessons I learned are mine alone, and they've made me resilient in ways I couldn't have imagined while I was still trying to keep him happy. I've realized that love should never cost your dignity. No matter how much you care, no matter how loyal or giving you are, your heart and your self-respect are priceless. I sacrificed a lot for someone who never truly valued me, and that taught me the hard way why it's important to stand firm for yourself. My revenge wasn't loud. I didn't need to yell, humiliate him, or show off my success. Walking away, reclaiming my independence, and building my own life quietly was enough. Every day I live fully, confidently, and peacefully is a reminder that I no longer belong to someone who betrayed me. That simple act of taking control of my life became my ultimate victory. Now, I can smile without guilt, make decisions without fear, and pursue my dreams without holding back. The sadness I once carried has transformed into strength, and the emptiness has been replaced with purpose. Life has given me a second chance, not just to survive, but to thrive. In the end, I learned that some of the strongest forms of revenge aren't loud or dramatic. Sometimes, the quietest act, walking away, standing tall, and living for yourself, is the most powerful statement of all. And that is the peace I have finally found.